we need to go back to and emphasize and model and demonstrate in the circles that we are in that we can disagree with one another politically without choosing to demonize them or dehumanize them in some way, but instead respect them as image bearers of the living God, and they're worthy of being treated with respect and dignity no matter what their opinions are. And just because they disagree with me does not make them a bad person. Half the battle is just showing up.
Yeah.
And I think if you just, if you don't know what the issues are and you want to make a difference, go attend a city council meeting, go to a county commissioners meeting and just listen. And you will learn so much about what's happening in your neighborhood and in your schools and in your community. And here's a place you might easily find places to plug in.
Okay, so this is going to be fun for me. This is one of my very good friends and one of my long-term cohorts in the city here. Dr. David Swanson is the senior pastor of First Presbyterian Church, Orlando, in the heart of the city. That's kind of their motto, and they've been the heart of the city for a long time in Orlando, been involved in so much that is helpful and socially impactful. David and I have been partners in various issues. We took turns co-chairing the Central Florida Commission on Homelessness, but always involved in trying to impact the city, whether it be a social impact or some sort of policy that would further the humanitarian efforts of neighbors loving neighbors. So anyhow, David, thanks for showing up, man.
Man, if you call, I'll answer.
Hey, you're the man.
Anytime.
You're the man. And we have, we go back a long way, decades of serving Orlando together. I guess I want to start out with, if you would tell us, out of your faith tradition, Presbyterian Reformed tradition, but there are various streams of that.
Sure.
And so, just as you have established your congregational leadership with First Presbyterian, what is that like when it comes to civil service, when it comes to being involved in policies and movements within the city for the benefits of the whole city? Give us your background.
Yeah. So I think as Presbyterians, we have had a long history of engaging in the public square. We believe in positive and civil public discourse, and where there are opportunities to make the community better, common grace tells us that we should be about what is best for the flourishing of a community, what is best for the flourishing of our neighbors, of all people in any community. And if we can bring that to bear, then hopefully that says something to the world about who we are as faithful followers of Christ. And so we are engaged, we are aware of what the issues may be, and we strongly encourage and have encouraged over time people to be engaged in politics, people to be in the public square, in the game, so to speak. And as you know, that has gotten harder and harder with the advent of social media, the level of scrutiny that is placed upon people, the questions that have to be answered, the digging that goes on into your background and all the things. And it just makes people, I think, less and less willing to run, less and less willing to be involved. So while we encourage it, we've certainly seen less of it. The other thing that has been interesting for First Presbyterian Church is I do think over the years, if you just went and talked to somebody on the street, they would probably tell you, well, First Pres is a Republican, affluent, kind of conservative stronghold. And contrary to popular belief, that's actually not who we are. We certainly have our fair share of Republican, conservative-leaning people, but we have plenty of Democrats. And, oh, by the way, our former state senator, Bill Nelson, he and his wife, Grace, were members when they were serving in the Senate. Our Orlando Mayor, Buddy Dyer, is what we call covenant partners, and I give the mayor a hard time when I see him about his lack of attendance, and he says, "Well, I get invited to speak at all these places. That's why I never get to be there." And so that's also true, is that unlike some churches where they might give candidates and politicians a platform, in our church we are always welcoming of any political figure, candidate to come and worship with us, and I'm happy to introduce them. But we keep the privilege of the pulpit to a focus on who we are in Christ, our worship, and we don't want to use Sundays to detract from that. So that's kind of where we've been. I don't, there are Christian voter guides that will sometimes be produced, and there'll be other things that kind of would tell people how to vote on certain things, and we just stay away from all that. Yeah. I'm never going to tell people how to vote, and my philosophy has always been I'm going to try to help people love the Lord their God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength, and if they are using that faith and the depth of that faith to inform how they vote, that's all I can ask for.
Now you've opened up several more questions. First of all, you used the phrase common grace. Explain that for folks who may not be familiar with
so
that term.
Common grace would be the grace of God that's available to everybody regardless of faith or belief. So, rain would be considered common grace. Yeah. When it rains on the crops of the rich and the poor, the believer and the unbeliever, that's just a common grace that's available to everybody. And so we believe that God calls us to serve and to do things that are for the common good. So that's kind of Jeremiah 29, seek the peace and prosperity of the city, for as it prospers, you too will prosper. So we want to be about the city, or pray for the city, want to be about the city's flourishing. We think that's good for everybody, and that's kind of a common grace.
Well, and First Pres has been such a model of not only ministry to many of the folks that are on the street and need that mercy and those resources, but also involvement in the larger issues, which another thing you said that really made me want to follow up. How do you counsel people, especially people in your congregation, to make a decision on a political issue? You mentioned these are very polarizing times, lots of divisions, lots of, and I want to get to how do you keep from dividing the congregation, but let's get more personal. Let's say you are either preaching or you're talking with someone who says, "Pastor, I'm just having trouble deciding who to vote for. What should I consider when I'm deciding that?"
Wow, that's a big one. I start with the fact that you need to be engaged in studying the issues for yourselves, and I think what I find is what is most often lacking is they haven't actually taken the time to dig into what the candidate's platform is or what the community issue is, what the long-term impact may be, and how that's not just going to affect their life, but the church's life and the community's life. And so I encourage them to have you done this study, and then have you spent time praying and doing the spiritual work of discernment. And I maybe some people would call it simplistic. I happen to believe that if you really pray about how God is going to lead you in a situation and you're faithful to the reading of Scripture and the ways that God will speak to us, I think He's gonna reveal the way that He wants you to go. I've never been someone who thinks that good politics means that you always have to have a Christian in office. I just don't think that that's the case. I think you need to have good leaders. I think you need to have people with morals and values. And so there are some things that I think are clear. And I have a very strong pro-life belief, and we will talk about that in our church. And so when it comes to issues of life and how people vote, I think that's clear to me biblically and in our church. And so I can't encourage that. But I also have, when you're voting for candidates, I don't think you can be a single issue voter. I think you have to look at the entire breadth and depth of what is being represented. And I think you do have to look at the character of the person and what kind of leader they are going to be. And then when trying to decide, what does that kind of leadership mean for the community at large? Mm-hmm. So what does it mean for the poor? What does it mean for the people who don't have a voice? What does it mean for the church? What does it mean for, as you and I know, some of the freedoms of the church are being attacked at some level? And are we going to continue to be exempt from taxes is one of those things. And so property taxes and such. So all those things matter. And so I try to get them to do the work spiritually, personally, socially, and then with that information, make the best choice that they can make with the information that they have.
Gotcha. When you were talking, I pictured people coming to the congregation, coming into the building, maybe for a worship service, maybe for another kind of meeting. What do you do if, and all of us who have led congregations have faced this, if people come in with apparel that is going to be problematic? Somebody wears a MAGA hat in church, or somebody has a T-shirt that says resist, or is that, I mean, do you do anything or just let it go?
It's interesting, Joel. I'm probably the outlier, but I can't ever think of that ever happening. We have a pretty strict policy that you can't wear hats in church. Uh-huh. And so if someone was wearing a hat, they would be invited to remove that for worship. Uh-huh. And if there was someone wearing something that I thought was divisive, I would certainly, you know me, I would not hesitate to have a conversation with that person and say, that divides more than it unites in a place of worship. And I think you need to be careful and thoughtful about what you do. So most of the sportswear that we see on our campus are First Pres branded shirts from, Serve Days or the 150th or the mission trip or that's what people tend to wear, and hats when they're around during the week, or our school shirts, our weekday school, the Christ School. But I have, I'm kind of glad I've never had the experience of having to deal with that. Maybe.
That's great.
So,
that's wonderful.
I've escaped that somehow.
This is wonderful. This is good. Let me ask you another question.
Yep.
When it comes to divisiveness itself, are you seeing anything during this season that would be different than other seasons about the kind of polarization, the kind of categorization, the name calling and the blaming and other kinds of dynamics that are not only dividing our country, but they're dividing our community and they're dividing our families. Mm-hmm. Are you talking about that at all?
I am, and I'm talking about it. I think a little bit more than I probably have in the past as we start coming up to the election and as people are starting to be more expressive about that. And I think the other thing is just from a community standpoint, we're about to have a huge local turnover in terms of political leaders. Yep. County and city mayor going to change, and that's a big deal. Mm-hmm. And so in all those things, what I continue to talk about always is that we need to go back to and emphasize and model and demonstrate in the circles that we are in that we can disagree with one another politically without choosing to demonize them or dehumanize them in some way, but instead respect them as image bearers of the living God, and they are worthy of being treated with respect and dignity no matter what their opinions are. And just because they disagree with me does not make them a bad person.
Right.
That and if we just start with that basic assumption, and to encourage active. What I talk about is, instead of the other person's going like this, and what you're doing is you're formulating in your head the next thing you're going to say. Yeah. You're not listening to what they're saying.
Yeah.
And so stop formulating and trying to win the argument.
Yeah.
it's not about winning; it's about understanding and learning, and trying to appreciate where the other person is. How did they arrive at that? And so you listen to maybe ask clarifying questions instead of you always coming up with the next gotcha thing to say. Maybe ask another question. Say, well, tell me more about this, and to understand where a person is. I just think we've lost that ability, and I want our church to model positive public discourse.
You bring up a very good point in that most people have never been trained how to have kind of a reconciling conversation, or at the very least, a conversation more pointed toward understanding than trying to make a point. Two questions. First of all, what is the lane that faith communities have to offer a community when it comes to involvement in the culture of that community that is special to our being a faith community? And then secondly, what kind of skills do you think people need in order to practically be able to have better conversations, not only about politics, but in their families?
Well, I'll deal with the second one first. In terms of the skills that we need, I do go back to, and we talk about this a lot, being active listeners, trying to understand the other person, and trying to find places of commonality. And so where I think we get a little off track, and maybe it's the lane that I think the church can offer, and this goes back to Paul at the Areopagus in Acts 17, and he's talking to the religious elite in Athens, and the first thing he does is he's trying to find common ground. I see that you are spiritual people. You've got all these temples and so forth. So he finds an area of common ground, and I think that's what the church can bring, is maybe we disagree on all these other things, but what can we agree on? We can agree that homelessness is bad. We can agree that hunger is bad. We can agree that an LGBTQ person shouldn't be discriminated against in their workplace, and they should have benefits just like everybody else. And we can be in agreement on certain things and be positive about that. And then once we find the places of agreement that these things are issues in our community, then okay, how are we going to address that together? How can we help the housing situation? How can we help in the area of transportation? One of the things that the law just passed in Florida, that now churches can build affordable housing on their properties. And there's actually, a local church, and I'm blanking on the name right now, but we were just talking about this in a Habitat for Humanity meeting, that there's a church that allocated some of their property to build affordable housing. So those are places where let's not get sidetracked by all the places we want to argue. Let's find the places that we agree on, and let's build on that.
When it comes to the difference between what's going on in our country and what's going on in our community, can you give us some boundaries that basically say Central Florida is not America at large? Central Florida is a very special place. You've been in ministry here for how long?
22 years.
22 years. Okay. There really is a character to Central Florida, Orange, Osceola, and Seminole counties, although the counties are very different in their constituencies. But yet Central Florida, in my experience, has been a wonderful place to live. We have terrific leadership that is very cooperative. What hope can you give to people who are so discouraged right now and half afraid?
Yeah. I don't know if you've seen any of the podcasts that have featured Ben Sass, who's the former senator from Nebraska, dying of pancreatic cancer, and just a faithful man, and he's doing so much in the last season of his life. But one of the things he talked about was how, people they put so much stock in what is going to happen in Washington and laws that are passed. And he essentially said, Washington is just not doing a whole lot.
Yeah.
And they're not really addressing the problems. But if we could come come down a few notches and just look at the local level and invest in our family, our neighborhood, our community.
Yeah.
That to me is where, and instead of getting and having expectations that, if this person wins this national election, that's going to solve our problem. Yeah. Let's start just looking at what's going to make our community better. Yes. And I love that he kind of pointed people in that direction. And I think that, to me, in 22 years here, has been the beauty of Central Florida, is that we are we're sort of a melting pot of backgrounds and approaches and faith backgrounds, everything in between. But what I love about it is we have a very a problem solver's attitude that says, you know what, if we all come together, we can figure this out.
Yeah.
And that if you want a seat at the table, that there's a seat at the table.
Yeah.
And that's what I have loved as a faith leader, is if there's ever been an issue and I go, I'd like to get involved in that, I've always been welcome.
Yeah.
And I just know, I'm from Dallas, Texas, and I know in the city of Dallas, you can't just waltz in and go, I'd like to help, They're going to say, well, get in line, or who are you? Yeah. And in Central Florida, it's like, man, come one, come all, let's really figure it out. And and that's across all the backgrounds and beliefs and political systems and all that. It's and that's why and you and I'm just sitting here thinking about all the things we've been involved in. We were involved in, after George Floyd's murder, we were involved in a huge racial reconciliation in the march across Division Street. And then we were involved after the Pulse shooting. The two of us were involved with some evangelical leaders and some leaders in the LGBT community on how we could improve mental health in that area and to get to know each other. And those are just unique things where you get invited to a table to have conversations that I look back on, and all those things were significant and meaningful for me, and I think helped our community.
Well, and you've been a key leader in all that, David. And I'm thinking, just as you're talking, there's such I'm looking for the right word here. Disappointment. I don't know. In larger in our institutions of federal government right now. I think the last time I looked, there was a 16% of the population had confidence that Congress could act in helpful ways. 16% of the population. But yet, if you take what our Catholic brothers and sisters has as the principle of subsidiarity, that is, those who are closest to the problem should make most of the decisions. That just makes a lot of sense to me. It really does. And I love the fact that you're right. I mean, we're all kind of jumping into this, and in every sector. And one of the things I love about the pledge is it's not just a one or two sector. It's every sector of our community is coming together and looking to participate together in these issues that are going to profoundly affect our kids and our grandkids as we go along. Well, what advice do you have for, I love this question, what advice do you have for people, again, who want to do something, they want to be helpful, but they've been busy raising their families. They've been busy, showing up at their job. They've been busy, but they still want to contribute somehow to the community and make things better. To a person that's just kind of saying, I'm just looking to make things a little bit better. I don't have a lot of time. I don't have a lot of money. I don't have a lot, but I would like to participate in something. What would you say to them?
I would say the first thing you need is a vehicle by which you're going to do that. And so for someone who's just in the community, you have to find a connection point. That could be a faith community, be a local church or synagogue or whatever, or it could be your neighborhood public school, could be a social service organization, a Rotary Club, a Kiwanis Club. You got to have a vehicle by which you're going to make that connection. And so get involved in something. And, and I just found, and I know you know this too, half the battle is just showing up.
Yeah.
And I think if you just, if you don't know what the issues are and you want to make a difference, go attend a city council meeting, go to a county commissioners meeting and just listen. And you will learn so much about what's happening in your neighborhood and in your schools and in your community. And here's a place you might easily find places to plug in. And then, what are the skills that you have? Again, I love Habitat for Humanity. We did our church did work on a house, and we had 20 guys over there with hammers, putting up siding. If you're handy, man, there are all kinds of places you can serve. The Christian Service Center, if you can serve food, that's a great place to do that. United Against Poverty. I mean, there's so many local organizations, and I would just say, just don't let, well, I've been so busy, I just don't know. Don't let that be your answer. Pick up the phone, get on the internet, do some research. And I think, there's a great book out by Carl Trueman. I don't know if you may have heard of this book. It's called The Desecration of Man. And so his point is that as we have moved God farther and farther out, you have to, if God is not the source of authority and the one to whom we draw our values and our decision-making and our belief and the value of our fellow man, if that disappears, then we're going to put ourselves in that role. Mm-hmm. And to do that means that we have to desecrate the values that have been in place in order to put my values in there. And so you see a lot of things that are being desecrated, whether that's the local church, local community, morals, values. And I think if we can just look to find things that restore the sacred and the good and the beautiful and the true, man, just bring, plant flowers, go bring beauty back to your neighborhood, right. Something like that. But I think we've gotten, there's been so much desecration. We need to go back to consecration and what helps consecrate what we believe and what we hold to be true.
I love that. Okay, let me come full circle.
Okay.
Last question,
Yep.
But we started out with your particular faith tradition and the stream
Yep.
of really quality political involvement or approach to community well-being. Let me get really personal here. What made you, as a person, develop this heart to help others out, to be concerned about more than just how much money you make, or can you keep your family safe? And what gave you the larger heart that I've seen in you and you've demonstrated in your ministry?
Wow, what a great question, Joel. I think it goes back to how I was raised. I think my dad was a Methodist. My mom was a Catholic. I was raised Catholic. And how, the beauty of Catholic charities and how they are so intent on trying to help the poor. I got that growing up. And I grew up in Dallas, and we lived kind of on the edge of an affluent area, but we were not affluent. And so I would see a lot of people who were having a life with which I was not familiar, and I also saw a lot of people being left out. And I remember in 1976 in Dallas, the schools were desegregated, and I remember watching the white community just the way they acted towards the black community was just deplorable, and I thought that's not right. And so the more I grew in my faith, and I moved from Catholicism into the Reformed faith and being Presbyterian when I was 18. And that just kind of put me in those places where I thought I want to try to make the community better, and those people who don't have voices. That was, and I can hear my mother's voice in the back of my head. She was the one who always said, find the person who's left out and bring them in, and how do you do that? So I think that's probably the answer to the question.
That's awesome. Thanks, man.
Oh, thank you for having me, Joel.
I love it. You've got great wisdom, and I'm awful blessed to be in a community where you're sharing it and demonstrating it.
Well, that feeling is mutual. Thank you.